Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025. President Donald Trump speaks at the opening of the 80th session of the United Nations on his America First agenda, criticizing the UN for being ineffective at preventing or stopping wars and criticizing Europe for its immigration policies. The president also meets in New York City with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and in a post says that Ukraine should be able to win the war against Russia and get back all its land. President Trump cancels a meeting with the U.S. House and Senate Democratic leaders to discuss federal government funding a week before the deadline to prevent a shutdown amid a standoff over the Democrats' insistence on including health care funding provisions. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell tells a Chamber of Commerce in Rhode Island that there is no risk-free path in deciding interest rate policy to balance lowering inflation and increasing job growth. And the memoir from former Vice President Kamala Harris, the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee, goes on sale. We'll hear one of the media interviews she's doing on her book promotion tour. Associated Press writes that President Donald Trump returned to the United Nations on Tuesday to boast of his second-term foreign policy achievements and lash out at the world body as a feckless institution, while warning Europe it would be ruined if it doesn't turn away from a double-tailed monster of ill-conceived migration and green energy policies. Later, in a bilateral meeting with the top UN official, Trump's tone toward the United Nations shifted after his speech earlier in the day blasted the world body for issuing empty words. Trump told UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, "Our country is behind the United Nations 100%. I may disagree with it sometimes, but I'm so behind it because the potential for peace at this institution is great." That was from Associated Press. In this portion of President Trump's speech to the UN General Assembly, he also mentions two incidents today. An escalator stopped as he and the First Lady were walking to the hall. At the beginning of the speech, his teleprompter stopped working.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's working now. It just went on. Thank you. I think I should just do it the other way. It's easier. Thank you very much. I didn't think of it at the time because I was too busy working to save millions of lives. That is the saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential. But it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action. Now, after ending all of these wars and also earlier negotiating the Abraham Accords, which is a very big thing for which our country received no credit, never receives credit. Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements. But for me, the real prize will be the sons and daughters who live to grow up with their mothers and fathers, because millions of people are no longer being killed in endless and unglorious wars.
President Donald Trump at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. Washington Post writing about this speech has this line: since Trump retook office, the United States has withheld as much as $1 billion in funding for the UN, and the organization has moved to cut staff as a result. The White House putting out a press release about the speech that begins today. In remarks to the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, President Donald J. Trump delivered a powerful rebuke to the destructive globalism that has fueled endless conflict and chaos around the world. During the address, President Trump was unapologetic in proclaiming American strength as he unveiled a bold vision for sovereign nations to unite against the true threats of terrorism, unchecked migration, biological warfare, and loss of cultural identity. That was from the White House. On migration policies, the president said that European countries are going to hell, and he accused the UN of funding an assault on Western countries and their borders.
Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the number one political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Think of that. The UN is supporting people that are illegally coming into the United States, and then we have to get them out. The UN also provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens. Can you believe that? On the way to infiltrate our southern border. Millions of people came through that southern border. Just a year ago, millions and millions of people were pouring in, 25 million altogether over the 4 years of the incompetent Biden administration. And now we have it stopped, totally stopped. In fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well. You have to do that because I see it. I'm not mentioning names. I see it, and I can call every single one of them out. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. Illegal aliens are pouring into Europe. Nobody's doing anything to change it, to get them out. It's not sustainable. And because they choose to be politically correct, they're doing just absolutely nothing about it.
President Donald Trump speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. Part of a speech that ran about an hour, Associated Press writing about it. The reaction from delegates was muted applause that was more polite than rousing. Trump also, however, was not audibly booed or otherwise shunned, despite spending large parts of his comments lecturing the global community on immigration policy, climate change response, and other key issues. And a few other topics. On climate change, he called that a con job, and said countries need to use traditional energy resources instead of renewable energy because he says renewables do not work. He also spoke about the war in Gaza, President Trump calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the return of all remaining hostages held by Hamas. And he criticized other countries' recognition of a Palestinian state. France co-chaired a conference alongside Saudi Arabia on Monday about Palestinian statehood, with President Emmanuel Macron formally declaring France recognizing the state of Palestine.
We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much, This could have been solved so long ago.
President Donald Trump at the UN. He later met with the leaders of a number of Muslim-majority countries discussing the war in Gaza, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, and Pakistan. On the war in Ukraine, President Trump, in his UN speech, criticized Europe for buying oil and gas from Russia, saying that is supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. He said they have to immediately cease all energy purchases from Russia, otherwise we are wasting a lot of time. New York Times article writing about this, although the European Union has sharply reduced its overall energy dependency on Russia, it continues to import some supplies and appears reluctant to completely sever the flows. And President Trump again threatened what he called powerful tariffs against Russia and said Russia's war in Ukraine is making them look bad because it was supposed to be a little skirmish. And he said it shows you what leadership is, what bad leadership can do to a country. The only question now is how many lives will be needlessly lost on both sides. That was all from the speech. Later in the day, President Trump met one-on-one with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
We've had an interesting day, I think a very productive day, and we're going to start a meeting with the president, who we all know very well. He's a brave man, and he's putting up one hell of a fight, and we'll see how that all turns out. But we're going to have a meeting, and we have about 30 meetings scheduled today. We have a lot of meetings scheduled today, going pretty late into the night, but this is an important one, and we have great respect for the fight that Ukraine is putting up. It's pretty amazing, actually. So, Mr. President, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. First of all, thank you for this meeting. Thank you for your personal efforts to stop this war just now, Mr. President. And I have to say that just now our first ladies of Ukraine, first ladies of the United States,
yes,
just now we'll have a meeting about Ukrainian children. Thank you for Melania's personal involvement to this topic. And this is very important. I will brief Mr. President and his team what's going on the battlefield. We have good news. Of course, we want to stop the war with your help, first of all. And it's good that our soldiers occupied 360 kilometers this month. And of course, we will speak about how to finish the war and about security guarantees. A lot of what to discuss. Thank you.
Would you like to say how you're doing on the battlefield?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. So thanks to our soldiers and to possibility to further the program when NATO countries, by the way, thanks to your support, they can buy weapon from the United States. So our soldiers this month they occupied 360 kilometers and they encircled 1,000 soldiers. And of course, we want to exchange because we need our soldiers in any case. But thanks to our soldiers, we have this possibility, this opportunity. And we will continue until Russia will stop this war, and I hope that they will stop in any case. We know that the economy of Russia is not doing well. So with this, during this war, we need more pressure, more sanctions. And I hope with the United States, first of all, and Europe, but we support, Mr. President, your idea, and I want to discuss it, how to stop some countries from Europe, how to stop the possibility to buy Russian oil and gas. Yes, I had conversation, by the way, with President of Slovakia, Prime Minister. We had a good conversation. I think that they need some alternative ways they will support this thing. I'm not sure that Hungarians are ready, but everything is in the future.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. President, do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Mr. President, any update on your talks with President Putin, and do you still trust him?
I'll let you know in about a month from now. Okay?
President Trump, your message to the...
to provide Ukraine with the security guarantees the same way as European allies?
Well, that's later down the road. We'll be talking about that. Hopefully, we'll be in a position to talk about that a little bit later on. It's a little bit too early to answer.
Why do you think Mr. Putin is not willing to meet with both of you?
President Trump, your message to President Orban, who is refusing to stop buying Russian oil.
Well, he's a friend of mine. I have not spoken to him, but I have a feeling if I did, he might stop. and I think I'll be doing that.
Thank you.
What progress do you think has been made on ending Russia's war against Ukraine since the last time you saw President Zelensky?
Well, the biggest progress is that the Russian economy is terrible right now. It's, as you know, it's crashing. And that, frankly, Ukraine is doing a very good job of stopping this very large army. It's pretty amazing. You know, this is a war that should have ended in 3 days, 4 days. People said it was going to be very quick, and you got to hand it to the Ukrainian soldiers and everybody involved. It's still going on, and that's not a good thing for Russia. This was supposed to be quick, and so, you know, Russia doesn't look very distinguished, having taken 3.5 years now, right? So
yeah.
3.5 years of very hard fighting, and it looks like it's not going to end for a long time.
President Donald Trump meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly opening in New York City. President Trump later posting on Truth Social, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. President Trump also in the lengthy post, that was just the beginning, calling Russia a paper tiger. Back to the speeches in the main hall as the UN General Assembly opened its 80th session. Brazil spoke first. That's a tradition that goes back to the 1950s for the UN. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva spoke about the trial of his predecessor, which has been the subject of tension between Lula and President Trump. Washington Post writes the U.S. Treasury Department on Monday announced sanctions against the wife of a Brazilian Supreme Court justice who ruled in favor of convicting former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro after he attempted a military coup to stay in power in 2023. President Trump, who has also been accused of trying to stay in power following an electoral defeat, has sought to pressure Brazil's top court to drop the charges against Bolsonaro. In July, Washington rolled out sanctions against the Chief Justice while Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. That was from the Washington Post. Here's President Lula addressing the UN today.
The aggression against the independence of the judiciary branch of power is unacceptable. This interference in domestic affairs is aided by a subservient far right who is nostalgic of past hegemonies. False patriots plan and publicly promote actions against Brazil. Peace cannot be achieved with impunity. A few days ago, and for the first time in 525 years of our history, a former head of state was convicted of attacking the democratic rule of law. He was investigated, indicted, trialed, and held accountable for his actions in a meticulous process. He has the right to defend himself was secured, a prerogative that dictatorships deny to their victims. Before the eyes of the world, Brazil sent a message to all aspiring autocrats and those who support them. Our democracy, our sovereignty are non-negotiable.
The Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva through an interpreter speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. President Trump, in his speech, criticized the Lula government for, quote, unprecedented efforts to interfere in the rights and freedoms of our American citizens and others with censorship, repression, weaponization, judicial corruption, and targeting of political critics in the United States. President Trump also said, I was walking in and the leader of Brazil was walking out. We saw him and I saw him. He saw me and we embraced. The White House says the two leaders will be meeting next week. Associated Press writes, with global peace and progress under siege, the United Nations chief challenged world leaders Tuesday to choose a future where the rule of law triumphs over raw power and where nations come together rather than scramble for self-interests. Here are the remarks by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
At its best, the United Nations is more than a meeting place. It's a moral compass, a force for peace and peacekeeping, a guardian of international law, a catalyst for sustainable development, a lifeline for people in crisis, a lighthouse for human rights, and a center that transforms your decisions the decisions of member states into action. 80 years on, we confront again the question our founders faced, only more urgent, more intertwined, more unforgiving. What kind of world do we choose to build together? Excellencies, we have our work cut out for us as our ability to carry out that work is being cut from us. We have entered in an age of reckless disruption and relentless human suffering. Look around. The principles of the United Nations that you have established are under siege. Listen, the pillars of peace and progress are buckling under the weight of impunity, inequality, and indifference. Sovereign nations invaded, hunger weaponized, truth silence, rising smoke from bombed-out cities, rising anger in fractured societies, rising seas swallowing coastlines. Each one a warning, each one a question. What kind of world will we choose? A world of raw power or a world of laws? A world that is a scramble for self-interest or a world where nations come together? A world where might makes right or a world of rights for all?
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres speaking this morning at the UN General Assembly opening in New York City. The new session of the UN brings together more than 140 world leaders and delegations to New York for the general debate speeches in the hall, the sideline one-on-one meetings, conferences, symposia, the United Nations Security Council holding meetings. And today there was one on the war in Ukraine, another in the war in Gaza, which the Israeli ambassador did not attend due to the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah. And C-SPAN will be covering a lot of it. You can find all the video at our website, cspan.org. This is Washington Today. Story from CNBC. President Donald Trump on Tuesday canceled a planned meeting with the two top Democrats in Congress to address issues holding up a funding deal that could avoid a federal government shutdown. Trump scrapped the sit-down set for this week just a day after people familiar with the situation said that his meeting with the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries would happen. Trump's move increases the likelihood of a shutdown. The two New York lawmakers are insisting that any stopgap deal to avoid a September 30th shutdown include protections for health care programs, including by extending Affordable Care Act enhanced tax credits, the credits which are usable for health insurance plans purchased on Obamacare marketplaces are due to expire at the end of the year. In a Truth Social post on Tuesday, President Trump wrote, after reviewing the details of the unserious and ridiculous demands being made by the minority radical left Democrats in return for their votes to keep our thriving country open, I've decided that no meeting with their congressional leaders could possibly be productive. That's the reporting from CNBC. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries writing on X, Trump always chickens out. Donald Trump just canceled a high-stakes meeting in the Oval Office with myself and Leader Schumer. The extremists want to shut down the government because they are unwilling to address the Republican health care crisis that is devastating America. And Congressman Jeffries held a news conference today in Washington.
Is an agreement dependent on a meeting? Are you and Leader Schumer saying that in order to reach an agreement, a meeting has to take place first? And go ahead.
We have to have a conversation with Donald Trump or Republican leaders in the Congress in order to try to find common ground in ways that can prevent a government shutdown. If Republicans expect Democratic votes, it's clear at the moment that Republicans are just determined to shut the government down. The partisan Republican spending bill failed. It does not have the votes to pass. They tried the my way or the highway approach, and they were shown the highway because the Republican spending bill guts the health care of the American people in ways that we as Democrats find completely and totally unacceptable. It's incredible to me that Republican leaders canceled votes in Washington, D.C. that was scheduled to take place next Monday and Tuesday on the eve of the government shutdown, meaning they don't even have any interest to show up and do their job in Washington, D.C. in order to address the Republican health care crisis and avoid a painful shutdown. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's clear they have decided to shut the government down, which is why they've entered into no good faith conversations with Democrats to try to reach a resolution. Donald Trump agreed to the meeting and then, in an unhinged way, reversed course this morning.
Following up on that, he reversed the meeting according to reporting because Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune told him that it would weaken their leverage. What's the irony in the fact that Leader Thune and Johnson wouldn't meet with you and Schumer because of Trump, and now Trump won't meet with you and Schumer because of Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson?
Donald Trump, House Republicans, and Senate Republicans are running scared because they don't want the American people to be faced with the reality of what they have done in the context of a White House meeting, because Republicans have done such damage to everyday Americans as a result of the health care crisis that is unconscionable, unacceptable, and un-American.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, news conference in Washington. The Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer held a news conference in Brooklyn, New York.
Donald Trump can't even negotiate a budget bill with Democrats, this great negotiator. The kind of meeting we wanted to have that he just pulled out of, it's the kind of thing every president has to do. It's plain and simple. By refusing to even sit down with Democrats, Donald Trump is causing the shutdown. This is a Trump shutdown, and he's barreling right towards it right now. And he knows he's going to be blamed for the shutdown. He's even said it himself. Let me tell you what Donald Trump has said in the past. He said, quote, "I actually think the president would be blamed for a shutdown." He's right. He's also said the president, quote, has to get people in a room and you just have to make deals for the good of the country. That's Trump. He ain't doing it. He's not up to this job, plain and simple. So, Mr. President, do your job. Stop ranting. Stop these long diatribes that mean nothing to anyone. Get people in a room and let's hammer out a deal. We Democrats are ready to work together to keep the government open for the good of the country and the good of the American people.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, news conference in Brooklyn today. Last week, the U.S. House passed a federal government funding extension to prevent a shutdown after September 30th and sent it to the Senate. The Senate then took two votes, one on the House-passed version that was favored by Senate Republicans, and the other on a version that included the health care provisions that the Democrats seek. Both failed to get the 60 votes needed. Today, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, decided the House recess of this week would be extended all through next week beyond the funding deadline, making the House unavailable to pass a different version of funding should one get through the Senate. This is what happened on the House floor today.
The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 23, 2025. I hereby designate the period from Monday, September 29, 2025, through Monday, October 6, 2025, as a district work period under Clause 13 of Rule 1. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
U.S. House Reading Clerk Susan Cole and Speaker Mike Johnson presiding during today's brief pro forma session. No legislative business conducted, but as you heard, extending the recess of the House through next week. Speaker Johnson writing today on X, last week House Republicans voted to keep the government open and sent our clean, nonpartisan, short-term government funding bill to the Senate. Now Democrats are threatening to shut the government down unless their demands are met, which include reinstatement of free health care for illegal aliens, $500 million for liberal news outlets, and other partisan priorities. In sum, this would be a massive $1.5 trillion spending hike tacked onto what is a simple 7-week funding bill unless they stop holding government funding hostage. This would clearly be the Democrat shutdown. That was the post from Speaker Mike Johnson. Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican of New York, was on Fox Business Channel today talking about the prospects of government shutdown and also what the Democrats are asking for in order to get their votes for it. Here first on the shutdown.
Republicans passed a clean CR, which is something that both Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries continually lectured America about during Joe Biden's administration. They said that we could not shut the government down, that it would have devastating impact on Americans, that it would cut off Social Security and veterans benefits. And yet now, today, they are willing to shut the government down unless they get what they want, which is hundreds of billions of dollars in increased federal spending. And they show no sign of recognizing that shutting down the government would have a negative impact on the economy and Americans, which they lectured us about just a few years ago. So, but the bottom line is we need to keep the government open. And it's why I voted when Joe Biden was president and when Donald Trump was president to keep the government funded. This is a short-term CR. We're talking about roughly 2 months so that we can finalize appropriations negotiations. What Democrats should be doing is keeping the government open so that we can finish our work on the appropriations for fiscal year 26.
Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, on Fox Business Channel. Also in this interview, he spoke about specifically what the Democrats are asking for to get their votes on a government funding extension.
Well, of course, they've tried to message this about health care and the fact that these Obamacare subsidies are about to expire. But these were put in place during COVID, understandably, to help Americans through a very difficult time. They are slated to expire at the end of this year. I and a number of my colleagues have signed on to legislation to extend them for 1 year so that we can appropriately phase them out and Americans don't face sticker shock on increased premiums. But there's a way to get there, and I think that can and should be negotiated as part of the appropriations package that will come due in November, including the fact that you can put an income cap on this so that people who are making, $800,000 a year are not getting a subsidy from the American taxpayer to purchase health care on the open market. So there's a lot that can be done here and should be done. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of that legislation to extend this. But we need to have a negotiation and not, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries grandstanding to get there.
Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican of New York, today on Fox Business Channel. When the House and Senate meet, as always, you can watch them gavel to gavel on C-SPAN television and C-SPAN 2, also on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and streamed at cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow down 88, NASDAQ down 215, S&P down 36. Washington today continues in a moment.
Past president, why are you doing this? This is outrageous.
This is a kangaroo court.
This fall, C-SPAN presents a rare moment of unity, Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. Join Political Playbook Chief Correspondent and White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns as host of Ceasefire, bringing two leaders from opposite sides of the aisle into a dialogue to find common ground. Ceasefire, this fall on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines from CBS News. A Florida jury on Tuesday found Ryan Ruth guilty of an assassination attempt against then-presidential candidate Donald Trump. Ruth represented himself in the trial. He was found guilty on all 5 charges, which included attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate and assaulting a federal officer. Ruth was arrested in September 2024 at Mr. Trump's golf course. A Secret Service agent testified last week that he spotted Ruth before the then presidential candidate came into view. Ruth aimed his rifle at the agent, who opened fire, causing Ruth to drop his weapon and flee without firing a shot, the agent said. After the verdict was read, Ruth apparently tried to harm himself, possibly using a pen that was on his desk to stab himself in the neck. His daughter cried out during the incident. U.S. Marshals eventually tackled him. That was from CBS News. And from NBC News, Jimmy Kimmel broke his silence after his brief suspension from the airwaves, posting a picture to Instagram on Tuesday of a Hollywood figure who was once described as being on President Richard Nixon's enemies list. Kimmel shared a photo of himself and Norman Lear, the television producer who was best known for his progressive activism. Lear died in 2023 at age 101. The late-night host captioned the photo, which features his arm around Lear, missing this guy already. And Jimmy Kimmel Live is set to return to ABC on Tuesday night after the network suspended the show over what it described as ill-timed comments from Kimmel on the murder of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. Nexstar Media Group said Tuesday that the ABC stations it owns and partners with will not resume airing Jimmy Kimmel Live, even as Disney brings the program back nationally. Nexstar's announcement adds to Sinclair, another major local TV operator, which said Monday it would not air Kimmel's show. That was from NBC News. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, begins a Yahoo Finance article, said there is no risk-free path for the central bank's next policy move as inflation remains elevated and the job market weakens. It's a challenging situation, Powell said during a speech in Rhode Island on Tuesday, reiterating that the Fed must balance its dual goals of maximum employment and price stability. Two-sided risks means there is no risk-free path, he added. That was from Yahoo Finance. Powell on Tuesday repeated many of the same points he made last Wednesday after the central bank voted to cut interest rates 25 basis points, and officials penciled in a median estimate of 2 more 25 basis point cuts by the end of the year. Chair Powell spoke at the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce.
We have 2 goals, as you mentioned, maximum employment and price stability, and they're equal goals under the law. So almost all the time, they work together. They complement one another. So, for example, when the economy is weak, the unemployment rate might be high and the inflation rate would be low, and that it calls for stimulus from us. And when the economy is really strong and the labor market is tight, that's when inflation will be moving up, and so policy might be a little bit tighter. That's almost always the case. Right now is the quite unusual case where risks to, as I mentioned in my remarks, risks to employment are to the downside and to inflation to the upside. Now, we only have one tool, which is monetary policy, really interest rates, and really it's calling for different answers. So for a long time, we have a document called the Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy. We call it the consensus statement to save time. That says, for a long time, it's said that when the 2 goals are in tension, we'll look at how far each one is from its goal and the time that it's expected to take to get back to that goal. And so we balance the 2 goals. So what we've done all year this year is we've had our policy rate has been tight because inflation has been above our target, but the labor market was very solid. Now, over the last really 4 months, really over the summer, the labor market has softened, payroll jobs have dropped a lot, so we can't really say that anymore. And I think what that told us is that stance of really having a tight focus on inflation really needs to moderate toward a more balanced approach. And so that's why we took the action we took at our last meeting. And as we go to our next meeting, to your question, we'll be asking ourselves, we'll be looking at the data very carefully, labor market data, growth data, inflation data, all of the vast quantities of data that we get, and asking ourselves, is our policy in the right place? And if not, we move it there.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell speaking at the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce today. That's in Rhode Island. New York Times writes that President Trump wants borrowing costs significantly lower, and his newest pick to join the Federal Reserve is ready to deliver. In his first speech as a member of the Board of Governors, Stephen Myron said interest rates should be roughly 2 percentage points below current levels, or around 2.5%. Mr. Myron warned that keeping interest rates elevated risks imperiling the labor market, which is already showing signs of cooling. That was from the New York Times. Governor Myron spoke on Monday at the Economic Club of New York.
in my view, insufficiently accounting for the strong downward pressure on the neutral rate resulting from changes in border and fiscal policies is leading some to believe policy today is less restrictive than it actually is. Today, I will give explicit consideration to non-monetary factors, such as shifts in border and tax policy, trade renegotiation, and regulatory dynamics that can have substantial effects on the appropriate setting for monetary policy. I'll focus on the factors that have changed most meaningfully over the course of 2025 as they relate to my expectations of inflation, R-star, and the output gap, emphasizing ones that I feel are underappreciated. Before I proceed, I want to be clear. I am not attempting to provide an impossible degree of precision, but a general ballpark. Based on this analysis, I believe the appropriate Fed funds rate is in the mid 2% area, almost 2 percentage points lower than current policy. The Federal Reserve has been entrusted with the important goal of promoting price stability for the good of all American households and businesses, and I'm committed to bringing inflation sustainably back to 2%. However, leaving policy restrictive by such a large degree brings significant risks for the Fed's employment mandate.
Federal Reserve Governor Stephen Miron speaking at the Economic Club of New York on Monday. More from the New York Times article on his speech. Mr. Miron's analysis stands apart from his new colleagues, many of whom have argued that the neutral rate has in fact risen since the pandemic as supply chains have been rewired and the global economy has faced successive rounds of inflation shocks. In the latest projections released by the Fed last week, most officials thought over the longer run the neutral rate was around 3%. Story from the Wall Street Journal. Kenvue is preparing for an explosion of litigation over its popular pain reliever Tylenol after the Trump administration warned that the drug's active ingredient is a potential cause of autism. Finding by President Trump's health officials, which Kenvue and some medical societies dispute, could provide ammunition to plaintiffs' attorneys who are seeking to reverse losses in older lawsuits alleging the medicine caused the neurodevelopmental disorders. And it could unleash thousands of new lawsuits in the coming years. People familiar with the matter say. That was from the Wall Street Journal. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana and chair of the Health Committee, and also a doctor, today was on Talk 107.3 FM, Baton Rouge, Louisiana radio, responding to President Trump's stronger words from Monday, where the president said, if you're pregnant, don't take Tylenol.
So first, any person taking medicine, anyone who's pregnant should speak to her physician regarding whatever medicine she should take. That's number one. Number two, they were quoting a study which found an association. Now, that's the key thing, an association. That doesn't mean it causes it. It just means that it's associated. I would point that there is an article out of Sweden. 2 million people followed. And what they did is they looked at someone who had autism and they compared them to a sibling who did not have autism.
Okay.
And they found no association, effectively, between taking Tylenol or not. Now, that is the best controlled study. That's the one which, you rank studies. Some are high quality and some of them not very good. That's the highest quality that's out there, and that found no association whatsoever. Why does this matter? Well, first, again, talk to your OB about it. But secondly, like I was talking to a woman, she goes, oh, this is great. 2 men telling me not to take the only thing I can take when my back's hurting and I'm pregnant.
Right.
2 men telling me not to take something. And so, and that she was just expressing her frustration.
Right.
So I get that. But there is a practical reason. This is the drug you take when you sprain your ankle and you happen to be pregnant. Mm-hmm. But talk to your OB. I think your OB is going to say it's safe to take. But as always, talk to your OB.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana. He chairs the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, also a doctor, speaking on WBRP, talk radio out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Talk 107.3 FM. There's a story from CNBC. European Union and British health agencies confirmed the safety of paracetamol, which is their name for acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, during pregnancy, disputing a warning from U.S. President Donald Trump linking the popular pain medication to autism. The World Health Organization said on Tuesday that evidence of a link remained inconsistent and urged caution in drawing conclusions. That was from CNBC. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump this morning in New York City on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly opening session, announcing a new initiative titled Fostering the Future Together. It aims to enhance the well-being of children worldwide through the promotion of education, innovation, and technology.
As children, we all played marbles, flew paper airplanes, and ran with a thin string in our hand watching our kites lift off. Great minds have turned marbles into microchips, paper airplanes into drones, and kites into satellites. Innovation is wonderful. Our nations benefit from advancements in technology, saving lives, expanding access to knowledge, connecting people, and of course, safety. Nothing comes before safety. We must safeguard healthy environments for our children, protect their personal freedom, their confidence, and motivation. Safety multiplies innovation. Since technology is evolving at a pace that exceeds lawmaking, we must identify simple solutions to protect our children's ingenuity. Remember, our next generation will also teach to revolutionize how we live, travel, design, and connect.
First Lady Melania Trump this morning in New York City on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly opening. The title of her new initiative, Fostering the Future Together, and an info sheet from the White House reads, the members of Fostering the Future Together will include the spouses or equivalent representatives of heads of government. Fostering the Future Together will be implemented by participating members at the local level within their respective countries. Mrs. Trump will host Fostering the Future Together's inaugural meeting at the White House during the first quarter of 2026. And finally, on Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio from Politico, Kamala Harris on Tuesday downplayed tension with fellow Democrats while accepting some blame for her 2024 election defeat as the former vice president's account of her abbreviated 15-week-long presidential campaign hit shelves. Harris's memoir titled 107 Days is so ripe with criticism for prominent Democrats such as California Governor Gavin Newsom, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and former President Joe Biden. The strategist opined it could represent a swan song from politics. That was from Politico. Here's part of her interview on ABC's Good Morning America.
There are so many people out there who felt that President Biden shouldn't have run for re-election. And you wrote in a book that it was, quote, Joe and Jill's decision, that other Democrats decided it was Joe and Jill's decision. Well, do you regret not voicing your opinion in that moment?
Yes, and I actually have reflected on that, and I've written about that. I realized. Would it have mattered if you did? I don't know. But I can only take responsibility for myself. Mm-hmm. And on reflection, and I talk about it in the context of asking a question of myself, was that grace to not bring it up to him, or was it reckless? Mm. And on my part, I do reflect on that and feel that there was a recklessness about not raising it with him. I talk about what was going through my head, right? And what was going through my head to not bring it up was that it would come off as being very self-serving, and therefore maybe lack the credibility that it deserved. But I do think about it. And I also say, though, and I speak extensively about this, my concern about him running for re-election was completely separate from my admiration and knowledge about his capacity to serve as President of the United States, which was consistent and never wavered.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris on ABC's Good Morning America on her book published today titled 100 Days, about her running for president in 2024 as the Democratic nominee. She is starting a book tour of 15 cities in the U.S., Canada, and Great Britain. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.